The wind screamed across the broken metal roofs of the mining outpost, tearing at Lyra's thin cloak as she stumbled through the rain-soaked alleyways. Her stomach ached from hunger, her hands numb from the cold, but she didn't stop. Somewhere beneath the collapsing warehouse she had heard the faintest sound, a whimper, weak and desperate. Lightning flashed, illuminating twisted beams and debris scattered across the mud. A sudden crash sent a shower of metal shards clanging to the ground. Lyra froze, heart hammering. The sound had come from inside. Without thinking, she ducked beneath a fallen girder and crawled toward the noise, dragging her satchel through puddles that stung her skin. A low, rattling groan came again. She squinted through the darkness and saw it, a small, trembling shape trapped beneath a fallen beam. Its skin glimmered faintly in the stormlight, pale and almost translucent, with tiny, flickering patterns that made her stomach twist with both fear and awe. It was alive but just barely. "Hey, hold on," Lyra whispered, her voice shaking as much as her fingers. She shoved against the beam with all her strength. Pain shot through her arms and a splinter cut her palm, but the creature's whimpers grew louder, urging her on. Finally, the beam shifted enough for her to crawl under and lift it out. The little creature collapsed into her arms, shivering, its tiny wings sticking out awkwardly, torn and limp. Lyra's heart surged. She had never seen anything like it, some kind of dragon maybe, though impossibly small. Its amber eyes blinked at her, unafraid, almost questioning. She pressed a hand to its tiny chest. It was still alive, weak but alive. Then another sound. A soft scuffle behind her. She spun, and two more shapes emerged from the shadows, smaller, thinner, skeletal. Their wings flickered with the same strange glow as the first, and their eyes reflected the storm like twin lanterns. They froze when they saw her, but not with fear. Recognition. Expectation. Lyra swallowed. "You're all alone?" she whispered. Her voice was hoarse yet strangely steady. Hunger, cold, and fear pressed against her mind, but the sight of these tiny, fragile lives stirred something deeper. She had to act. She scooped the second and third creatures into her cloak, ignoring the mud that soaked her boots. Okay, let's get you out of the rain." She ran, stumbling through the debris-strewn streets toward a sheltered corner of the outpost she knew, the old storage shed where she sometimes hid to sleep. Inside, the storm's roar softened to a dull rumble. Lyra set the creatures down on a pile of torn blankets, checking each one quickly. Their ribs protruded sharply, their breaths were shallow. She tore a piece of stale bread from her satchel and crumbled it in front of them. One hesitated, sniffed, then greedily nibbled. Another tilted its head, its strange markings pulsing faintly as it tasted the food. Lyra exhaled. A small, victorious smile curved her lips. "You're going to be okay. I'll make sure of it." The creatures huddled together, and for a moment she allowed herself a flicker of hope. But outside, the storm wasn't done. A distant roar, low and guttural, echoed across the valley. Lyra froze, blood turning cold. It wasn't thunder. Not this time. Something enormous was moving out there. Something alive. The cubs twitched nervously, one lifting its head and letting out a sound that wasn't quite a growl, not quite a cry, a strange trembling vocalization that made Lyra's skin prickle. She realized with a sudden jolt that it was communicating. Somehow, they were trying to tell her something. Her first instinct was fear, but she pushed it down. There was no time. If she hesitated, she could lose them or worse. She grabbed a lantern, its dim light flickering across their tiny, glowing bodies, and moved to barricade the door with crates and beams she could find. The cubs followed, staggering and weak yet staying close. The roar came again, closer this time. The shed shuddered under the force of wind and something heavier, something unseen, pressing against the walls. Lyra held her breath, praying the barricade would hold, praying the cubs would survive the night. Then, without warning, a single flash of lightning illuminated the sky, and something massive moved across the ridge, far larger than any creature she had ever seen. Wings. Immense wings far beyond the cubs. And they weren't alone. Shadows of shapes, massive and graceful, cut through the storm. Lyra's mouth went dry. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She looked at the cubs, their eyes wide and shimmering with fear and recognition. They knew. Somehow they knew what had arrived. A trembling thought hit her, sharp as ice. These little lives, the creatures she had just saved, had a family. And that family was coming for them. Lyra tightened her grip on the lantern, heart hammering. "We'll get through this," she whispered, more to herself than them. "We have to." A sudden crash on the roof sent dust and splinters raining down. The cubs hissed in terror and Lyra's stomach dropped. Whatever waited outside, it wasn't just a storm anymore. Something alive, intelligent, and enormous had marked their presence, and now they had to face it. She held her breath, eyes on the shadows flickering against the walls, waiting for what would come next. The storm finally began to ease, leaving the world outside dripping and gray. Lyra stayed huddled over the cubs, her arms wrapped around them, their fragile bodies trembling against hers. She could hear every drip of water, every creak of the old shed, as if the building itself were listening. The distant roars had faded, but something still lingered, an unshakable sense that the creatures outside weren't done with them. For now the cubs were safe, but they were starving. Lyra tore small strips of cloth from her cloak, soaked them in water, and mixed them with the crumbs of bread she had left. She held the concoction to their tiny mouths. One hesitated, then licked it tentatively. Another nibbled eagerly, revealing a tiny flicker of strength returning to their bodies. Lyra's chest tightened with relief. Every bite they took was a small victory. But even as she fed them, a new worry gnawed at her. She had no idea what these creatures were, or what would happen when the rest of their kind returned. The cubs stirred, their strange glowing markings pulsing faintly. They seemed aware of her tension, leaning closer, seeking reassurance. Lyra whispered, "We'll figure it out. I promise." The night passed slowly, punctuated by the wind rattling against the walls. Lyra drifted in and out of sleep, one eye always on the cubs. When morning came, the storm had left the outpost muddy and chaotic. Broken beams and scattered supplies blocked many paths. Lyra knew she couldn't stay here. Someone, other humans, would come looking, drawn by rumors of strange creatures. And if they found the cubs, it would be over before it began. She moved quietly, packing a small satchel with food, blankets, and scraps of metal for protection. The cubs stirred, sensing the urgency, and she murmured to them, "We have to move, come on." One of them pawed at her hand, a low, almost human-like whimper escaping its tiny throat. She understood instinctively that it wanted to follow. Outside, the mud sucked at her boots, but she pushed forward. Every shadow seemed alive, every puddle reflected movement that wasn't there. She kept one hand on the nearest cub, the other clutching a makeshift stick. Her mind raced. Where could she hide them? The abandoned mines nearby were dangerous, unstable tunnels, sudden drops, but they offered cover. Halfway to the mines, she heard voices. Harsh, angry human voices. Scavengers likely searching for shelter after the storm. Lyra froze, pressing herself against a crumbling wall, the cubs hidden under her cloak. Her heart pounded. If they found her, they'd never understand. These weren't just animals. They were intelligent, fragile, and if she failed, they'd die. The scavengers passed, oblivious. Lyra exhaled silently, relief and fear mingling in her chest. She whispered to the cubs, "We're okay, for now." Their tiny heads tilted, glowing softly in the dim morning light. For a brief moment she allowed herself to hope. But hope was dangerous. As they entered the entrance to the mines, the ground trembled beneath their feet, not from the storm but from something deeper. The cubs stiffened, ears flicking toward the shadows. Lyra's stomach clenched. She had felt it before, in the storm, in the roar on the ridge. Something massive was approaching. Something that moved with purpose. Inside the mine the air was damp and heavy but safer. Lyra set the cubs down on a pile of broken crates and began examining the walls. Old supports groaned above her. She picked up a shard of metal, tapping the walls gently. The echoes were uneven, cavities, tunnels, spaces large enough to hide. This would be their shelter. She fed the cubs again, watching them grow stronger by the hour. One even began to attempt flapping its damaged wings, small sparks of light dancing across the thin membranes. Lyra smiled, her heart warming despite the tension. They were survivors. And so was she. But the calm was short-lived. The mine trembled violently. Dust fell from the ceiling. The cubs shrieked, huddling under her arms. From deep within the tunnels came a sound that froze her blood. A low, resonant growl, followed by a rhythmic pounding like massive footsteps. Lyra pressed herself against the wall, holding the cubs tight. Her mind raced. These tunnels were deep, but if the creature found them, there would be nowhere to hide. Then a voice echoed through the mine, human but panicked. "What's in here? Someone's hiding something." Her pulse spiked. Scavengers again or something else. She had to act. She grabbed a torch and held it high, the cubs hissing in alarm, yet staying close. Lyra's voice rang out, firm and commanding despite the fear clawing at her throat. "Go away. Leave us alone." A shadow moved at the mouth of the tunnel, hesitating. Then the voice called again, sharper. "I know you're here. Show yourself." Lyra's hand tightened around the torch. She had a choice: flee deeper into the mine with the cubs, risking collapse and unknown hazards, or stand her ground and hope her courage would buy them time. She took a deep breath. Humans could be cruel, but they could also be clever, strong, and brave. She had to trust herself. The shadow hesitated, then moved back. A figure, tall, wary but not hostile, appeared at the entrance. Lyra could see the confusion in their eyes as they glimpsed the tiny glowing creatures huddled under her cloak. She stood tall, holding the cubs close. "They're just babies," she said firmly. "They're not dangerous. Please, don't hurt them." The stranger blinked, uncertain, and then slowly nodded, backing away. Lyra exhaled, relief crashing over her like a wave. The cubs squeaked softly, their tiny bodies trembling but alive. She knew this was just the beginning. The cubs were safe, for now, but the tremors, the roars, and the shadows had shown her one terrifying truth: they were not alone. Something bigger, something intelligent was moving toward them. And Lyra understood, deep in her bones, that the small act of saving these creatures had set forces into motion she could not yet comprehend. As she settled the cubs into a hidden alcove, their tiny glowing eyes staring up at her, a distant rumble shook the mine. The cubs flinched and Lyra's heart raced. Far above, beyond the mine and the outpost, massive shapes were moving. Their wings beat the air, strong and deliberate. She pressed the cubs to her chest and whispered, "We'll face it together, whatever it is." But in the shadows something watched. And it wasn't human. The mine was quiet now, but Lyra couldn't move. She pressed herself against the cold stone wall, feeling the small bodies of the cubs huddled against her chest. Their warmth was fragile, but it reminded her why she couldn't falter. Outside, the wind whispered through the broken outpost, carrying a sound that made her stomach twist. A distant, rhythmic roar, but not like the first one. This was deliberate, intelligent. Lyra shifted, peering down one of the deeper tunnels. The cubs' glowing eyes followed her every movement, reflecting curiosity and fear. She had begun to notice patterns in their behavior. The way they perked up when certain vibrations reached the walls, the way their markings flickered brighter in response to sound. Something about them wasn't ordinary. They weren't just surviving, they were observing, learning, communicating. She shook her head. No time for theorizing. She had to keep them alive. But curiosity gnawed at her. Why were these creatures here? Why now? And what did that roar mean? Lyra adjusted her satchel and pulled out scraps of food. The cubs sniffed eagerly. One nibbled, then paused, ears flicking toward the entrance. Lyra froze, following its gaze. Something shifted in the darkness, a shadow larger than the cubs but smaller than anything she had seen from the ridge. Her pulse spiked. Then it moved. A figure, tall and sleek, stepped into the faint light of her torch. Its skin shimmered faintly in patterns like the cubs, but larger, more complex. Lyra's mouth went dry. It wasn't human. The cubs stiffened, their wings quivering. The creature tilted its head, watching her. Then it hissed, not in anger but almost like recognition. Lyra's heart raced. Recognition? Could it know the cubs? Suddenly, one cub leapt from her arms, stumbling toward the creature. Its glow intensified, wings flaring slightly. Lyra's stomach dropped. Had she just led them into danger? The larger creature responded, not with violence, but a resonant roar that filled the mine, vibrating through the walls. Lyra staggered back, clutching the remaining two cubs. Then, something incredible happened. The cub she had just released lifted its head and emitted a sound, a sharp, musical trill that echoed like a code. The larger creature answered with a deep, rumbling call. Lyra's mind raced. They were communicating. Not just with each other but somehow with her presence as well. She realized with a jolt that the cubs had been calling their kin all along. That first roar in the storm, it had been a warning, a signal. She had no idea what this species was capable of, but now she understood the truth. The small act of saving these creatures had set forces into motion far beyond her understanding. Her heart pounded. If the cubs' family had heard them, what would come next? She had only her courage, her wits, and her empathy to guide them. And she had to act, fast. Lyra grabbed a shard of metal from the ground, pressing it into her hand like a makeshift weapon. She whispered to the cubs, "Stay close. We can face this together." The remaining two quivered in response but stayed at her side. Outside the mine, the ground trembled. Dust fell from the ceiling. The roars multiplied, this time clearly from more than one creature. Lyra's eyes widened. The cubs' markings pulsed brighter, almost feverishly, as if signaling urgency. She realized something terrifying. This was no longer about survival. This was a reckoning. Lyra took a deep breath, forcing her fear into focus. She had learned to survive, to act decisively. She remembered the fallen beam she had lifted the first night, the careful traps she had made in the outpost. She could do this. She had to. She led the cubs deeper into a narrow tunnel, where the walls narrowed and the ceiling lowered. The cubs followed, glowing faintly, flapping weak wings against the air. They seemed calmer here, protected by the confinement. Lyra found an alcove, just large enough to shield them, and barricaded it with rocks and debris. From the darkness came another roar, closer this time. The mine shuddered and Lyra's heart leapt. Then the cub's behavior shifted again. One pressed against her arm, vibrating slightly, wings flaring. Lyra realized it was a warning. They were not alone, but neither were they without allies. Somehow the cub's kin were nearby, and they were intelligent enough to navigate the terrain, to search for their lost young. Her mind raced. If these creatures could coordinate, they could protect each other. And if they could protect each other, maybe they could protect her too. Lyra crouched low, whispering softly, her voice trembling but firm. I don't know what's coming. I don't know if we can survive it. But I do know this: we stick together. And we fight smart. She felt a tiny head press against her chest, the warmth of trust and connection grounding her. A sudden flash of light from deeper in the tunnel startled her. A shadow passed across the walls, massive, winged, and impossibly fast. The cubs hissed, glowing brighter in fear and recognition. Lyra's stomach twisted. This was no longer a simple survival story. She had pulled these lives into a storm far larger than herself, a storm she had only just begun to understand. Then a voice, a whisper almost carried on the vibration of the walls, reached her. It was not human, not entirely. It was the cubs. The trill of their call echoed in her mind like a puzzle she could almost understand. She realized, the fleet, the larger creatures, had heard the cubs. They were coming. Lyra pressed the cubs closer, heart hammering. Whatever comes next, we face it together. We survive. We win. We have to. The mine trembled again, louder, more deliberate. Dust fell from the ceiling like rain. And from deep within, far beyond her sight, a shadow unfolded, a shape immense enough to blot out light, its wings stretching wider than any building she had ever seen. Lyra's breath caught. She had no weapons, no reinforcements. Only her courage, her determination, and the fragile lives in her arms. And yet, despite the fear, a spark of hope flared. These creatures, these dragons, had recognized her. They were intelligent. They were capable. And somehow, they were ready to follow her lead. She clenched her jaw. Bring them on, she whispered. I'm not letting anything happen to you. The ground trembled once more, and the distant roar of dozens of dragons filled the mine, echoing like thunder, but this time it was deliberate. They were coming. The mine shook violently as Lyra crouched in the narrow alcove, clutching the cubs to her chest. Their tiny bodies pressed against her, wings quivering, glowing brighter with fear and recognition. Outside, the ground thumped with rhythmic force, footsteps too heavy to be human, too deliberate to be random. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and something alive, enormous and powerful. Lyra's heart pounded, but she forced herself to think. The cubs' kin were here, she realized. Their intelligence, their coordinated calls, they weren't coming to attack. But humans above the mine might see them and panic. If anyone tried to fight them, the consequences would be catastrophic. She couldn't let that happen. She stood, trembling but resolute, the cubs hissing softly in response. She forced herself to step into the open tunnel, torch held high, her voice strong despite the fear in her chest. Wait. Don't attack. A human voice shouted back, sharp and panicked. What the hell is down here? Are those things alive? Lyra's pulse spiked. She realized she had seconds to act. They're just babies. They're intelligent, they can understand. They won't hurt anyone if you don't. She gestured toward the cubs, their glowing forms small but unmistakably alive. From deeper in the tunnel, a shadow moved, massive and fluid. Lyra froze and her breath caught. One of the cubs leapt from her arms and flapped its tiny, damaged wings, letting out a trill that reverberated through the mine. The shadow responded instantly, a deep, echoing roar that made the walls shudder. It was enormous, bigger than anything Lyra had imagined. And then another shadow followed, and another, their silhouettes blotting out the faint light from the torch. Lyra's stomach sank. The full fleet was here. The cubs' parents, siblings, dozens of dragons, massive and winged, intelligent and wary, their glowing patterns flickering in recognition. Lyra's mind raced. If the humans panicked, if they attacked, she could lose everything she had fought to protect. She had to control the moment, to mediate between these two worlds. She stepped forward, heart hammering, holding her arms out. Listen to me. You're intelligent, I can see it. They're scared, so are you. We can do this without fighting. Her voice echoed in the cavern, steadying her own trembling limbs. A human figure stepped forward from the shadows, weapon drawn. Lyra didn't flinch. Instead, she held her ground, torch illuminating the cubs pressed to her chest. Stop. They're babies. Please. Her eyes met the stranger's, pleading but resolute. I've raised them. I've fed them. I've protected them. If you shoot, you'll destroy lives you don't understand. The stranger hesitated. The ground shook again. The dragon's wings beat lightly, like the wind before a storm. Then came the first roar, this one deeper, closer, intelligent. It vibrated through Lyra's bones. The cubs responded instantly, their trill matching the pitch. Lyra gasped. The dragons recognized her. They were listening to her, responding to her, trusting her despite the human chaos around them. She realized in that instant, she didn't need weapons. She didn't need allies. She had the courage to stand, the wisdom to act quickly, and the bond with these creatures to make the impossible work. Lyra dropped to her knees, lowering the cubs to the ground. She gestured to the humans and the dragons alike. See? They trust me. You can too. We can coexist, but only if no one attacks. I won't let anything happen to them, or to you. The air vibrated as the dragons shifted, moving closer, their massive wings brushing the walls. Some lowered their heads to meet the cubs, their immense eyes softening, acknowledging Lyra's authority. The humans hesitated, confusion replacing fear. Then the first cub stepped forward. It flapped its tiny wings, emitting another trill, higher this time, urgent but controlled. The dragons answered with a deep chorus, and the vibration spread through the mine like music. Lyra realized the cubs weren't just communicating, they were mediating. They were showing both sides that peace was possible. Her heart soared, but the danger wasn't gone. The mine trembled more violently now, rocks falling from the ceiling. Lyra knew the structure might not hold if anything panicked. She shouted above the roar of wings, "Everyone stay calm. Move slowly, carefully. Protect the cubs, they're the key." The dragons obeyed, circling carefully, their massive forms folding into the tunnels with surprising grace. The humans, uncertain, followed Lyra's lead. One of the cubs climbed onto her shoulder, glowing brightly, wings beating weakly but steadily. Its eyes met hers, full of trust and expectation. Lyra's chest swelled with courage. She could do this. She could bridge these worlds. The impossible odds, the storm, the human threats, they didn't matter. Her determination, empathy, and intelligence had brought them here, alive, and now she had to guide them through this final moment. Then a massive shadow passed over the alcove. Lyra's eyes widened. One of the adult dragons, enormous and sleek, pressed close to the ceiling. Its amber eyes met hers. For a heartbeat, time froze. Lyra realized she wasn't just protecting the cubs anymore. She was negotiating the survival of an entire species, and humans too. A sudden tremor rattled the walls, louder than before. Rocks tumbled, dust filled the air, and the ground shook beneath her feet. Lyra's breath caught. The mine was unstable, but the dragons remained calm, hovering just enough to avoid collapse. The cubs hissed in warning, and Lyra instinctively moved to shield them. The leader dragon let out a low, rolling roar, echoing through the tunnels. Lyra understood. It wasn't aggression. It was acknowledgement, recognition, respect. She whispered to the cubs, "We did it, we're safe, for now." Her voice trembled, but her resolve did not. The humans slowly lowered their weapons, eyes wide with awe. The dragons shifted back, wings folding neatly, surrounding the cubs like guardians. Lyra pressed herself against the wall, chest heaving, but a small, victorious smile broke through. She had faced impossible odds, and she had survived. But the tremors weren't over. Far above, in the open sky beyond the mine, shapes moved faster than anything she could comprehend. The roar of wings and wind carried a warning. Something, or someone, was watching them. Lyra's pulse quickened. She hugged the cubs close. The dragons had accepted her, but this was only the beginning. The real challenge was yet to come. She whispered to herself, voice firm despite the fear, "Whatever comes next, we face it together." And in the shadows above the mine, beyond her sight, a new, even larger presence waited. The mine was quiet now, though the echoes of wings and roars still hummed in the walls. Lyra sat on a pile of broken crates, the cubs curled against her chest, their tiny bodies warm and alive. Outside, the dragons moved with grace, circling slowly, watching the horizon. Lyra's heart was still racing, but a sense of calm settled over her. For the first time in weeks she allowed herself to breathe. The cub's markings glimmered softly in the dim light. One nuzzled her neck, its tiny wings fluttering. Lyra smiled, brushing a strand of wet hair from her face. "We made it," she whispered, voice trembling with relief. "You're safe. We're all safe." She looked around the mine. The human scavengers had backed away, confusion and awe etched on their faces. They had seen the dragons, the full fleet, and witnessed her courage. They had expected violence, chaos, maybe death. Instead, they saw understanding, intelligence, and restraint. Lyra realized something important. Human courage wasn't always about strength or weapons. Sometimes, it was about empathy, intelligence, and the willingness to stand firm when everything seemed impossible. She leaned back, letting the cubs rest against her. She thought about the first night, when she had lifted the smallest of them from beneath the fallen beam. How fragile and weak they had been. And now, here they were, safe and alive, part of a larger world she barely understood. Her heart swelled. She had saved them, yes, but they had also taught her something. That courage could be quiet. That compassion could change the course of events far beyond what one could imagine. One of the adult dragons landed nearby, immense and regal, wings folding neatly at its sides. Its amber eyes met hers. Lyra's breath caught. She hadn't expected a direct acknowledgement, but it was there, an understanding that transcended words. She pressed her hand to her chest, feeling the pulse of life, and the creature's low rumble seemed almost like a thank you. The cubs stirred, responding to the adult dragon. They flapped their tiny wings, glowing brighter, communicating in their trills and chirps. Lyra listened, trying to follow the pattern, and realized they were introducing her to the fleet, showing her as a protector, a bridge between human and dragon worlds. A smile broke across her face. Against impossible odds, she had earned their trust. But her relief was tempered by caution. The sky beyond the mine shimmered faintly, the storm long gone but replaced by a strange stillness. Lyra sensed it. The cubs' behavior hinted at more than gratitude. Their ears twitched, wings fluttered, and one emitted a sharp trill toward the horizon. Lyra followed its gaze and froze. Shadows moved far above, shapes enormous and deliberate. They were not part of this fleet. Something, or someone, was watching them. Her chest tightened, but she did not panic. She pressed the cubs close, feeling their warmth, their trust. "We've faced worse," she whispered, voice firm despite the fear. "We survive. We adapt. We fight smart. Together." The human scavengers had gathered at the mine's entrance. Some were silent, some whispered to one another, their fear giving way to awe. A few stepped forward hesitantly. Lyra held her hands up. "Please," she said. "They are not your enemies. And if you act recklessly, we all lose. Watch, learn, and survive with us." The tallest scavenger nodded slowly. The rest followed. For the first time, Lyra realized she was teaching more than just courage. She was showing intelligence, diplomacy, and restraint. Humans could survive, but only if they learned to act wisely, to respect life beyond their own. She smiled faintly. This was the HFY truth. Humans could shine in ways no weapon could ever achieve. The cubs climbed onto her shoulders, chirping and trilling in a pattern she now understood a little better. She laughed softly, the sound echoing in the mine. "You little troublemakers," she murmured, "you've changed my world." The adult dragons shifted closer, wings folding elegantly, acknowledging the bond she had forged. The cubs responded, a tiny chorus of lights flickering across their wings, a small celebration and a quiet reward for her bravery. Lyra rose, the cubs balanced carefully on her shoulders and looked out of the mine. The sky was calm, but the shadows on the horizon reminded her that survival was never final. The dragons had returned, but there were always larger forces at play. Forces she could not yet see, challenges she had not yet faced. She pressed a hand to one of the cubs, feeling its heartbeat, feeling its trust. "We did it," she whispered. "But this isn't the end. Not yet." The cubs chirped in agreement, as if understanding her words in a way beyond speech. A deep rumble from outside made the mine shiver again. The fleet shifted in unison, wings stretching, eyes alert. Lyra's pulse quickened. This was more than survival. This was preparation, training, and proof that humans could stand as equals to the incredible, the alien, the impossible. Her gaze drifted upward, toward the faint glimmer of light beyond the ridge. Something watched, waiting, calculating. She didn't know what it was, but she understood one thing clearly. Courage, intelligence, and compassion were not just tools, they were shields, swords, and keys. And she had all three. Lyra adjusted the cubs on her shoulders, taking a deep breath. "Whatever comes next," she said softly, "we face it together. Nothing can stop us if we're smart, brave, and together." The dragon stirred, acknowledging her command, not from fear but respect. The cubs trilled in response, glowing brighter. And far beyond the ridge, unseen, an alien signal pulsed faintly through the sky, subtle but unmistakable. Someone somewhere was watching. Lyra's lips curved into a determined smile. She had survived storms, fear, and impossible odds. She had saved lives that mattered. And she would face whatever came next, because humans could shine even in the darkest, most dangerous corners of the universe. The mine fell silent once more, save for the steady breathing of the cubs and the soft rustle of wings. But the pulse in the sky promised one undeniable truth: this adventure was only the beginning.